everyone, welcome to this video. Today we are going to be talking about my favorite nonfiction books that I read this year. If you missed it, I recently did a best and worst video of the fiction books that I read, but I read way more nonfiction this year than I ever have in my entire life. And so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make this into its own video because I have some really good nonfiction here that I would like to talk about. And what's even better is that there's no worsts on this list because I didn't read any nonfiction this year that I really hated. So that's always a win. It's a win to not hate things. Okay, let's just jump right in. The first nonfiction book that I would like to talk about is So You've Been Publicly Shamed by Jon Ronson. I read this book because of the Books Unbound podcast. Honestly, I read so many books because of them this year. You should listen to their podcast. They're very funny and very sweet, and I really enjoy the books that I read because of them. So You've Been Publicly Shamed is a book that talks about the act of public shaming, and specifically on the internet. And it is a bit of an older one, so I would really love it if Jon Ronson just rewrote this book with more modern context. But you know, he talks about just various people who did or said things, and then what happened to them. Like an example, one lady is an example of she said something racist or considered racist. I can't remember exactly what it was. She said something that was considered offensive. She did not mean it to be offensive. She got on a plane. While she was on a plane, everybody freaked out about it. I think this was on Twitter. And so far as to call her workplace and report her. And when she got off the plane, she was fired. She had lost her job. And everybody hated her. So that's an example of, you know, public shame going to a pretty far place, right? So, you know, he doesn't necessarily talk about whether or not what they did was okay or not okay, but just the act of shame and how we change the way we act when we feel shamed from other people. And I just thought it was very interesting. Like I said, I would love for Jon Ronson to rewrite this book with newer examples, because social media is so great at being so mean and cruel and shaming people for the tiniest things even. So I think that would be something that would be really interesting to dive even deeper into. The next book is 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now by Jaron Lanier. This guy was one of the people in the beginnings of social media and creating it, and basically he's just talking about the ways that social media is bad for your brain, because honestly it is. Now, what's really interesting, and I do think this book should be maybe titled differently, because he talks about just deleting your social media, period, because he says, you know, we have to stop this cycle of the way social media works. But I don't know, I think that it would have been a little more constructive perhaps for him to talk about the ways you can change social media while being on social media, because I don't think that it's realistic to expect everybody to just delete all their social media accounts. I do think it's always a good practice to limit your time on social media and to just be aware of it, right? Because it can really affect the way that you think and the way that you look at other people. And so I think that even, you know, partaking in something like this book where you're just being really aware of how social media affects you, how it affects other people, and how you are behaving online is always a good practice. So that was a very interesting one. The next one was Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. This is a book about mushrooms and fungi. I really think that mushrooms and fungi are really, really cool. I've always thought they're cute. You know, I enjoy drawing them. I enjoy looking at them because I think that they're just interesting. But the way that a fungus actually works is so interesting to me. And you know, these mycorrhizal networks of fungus in soil and how it helps trees communicate with one another. I mean, that is just the coolest thing ever to me. And I think this book is kind of what started me into this nonfiction that is about a very specific topic, and just somebody talking about their absolute love for something fungus and mushrooms and lichen, and I just learned so much from it, and I thought that it was really interesting. There were a few parts that dragged a little bit, but all in all, I think about it often because I'm like, that's just so cool. Like, this makes me want to like go get a degree in fungus. It makes me want to go to school and learn more about fungus. So that's why I really, really enjoyed it. The next one is From Here to Eternity by Caitlin Doughty. This is a book that I got for my birthday, and it is, Caitlin Doughty is a mortician, and I read her other book, one of her other books. She has, I think, a few more besides this. Anyway, what's it called? When Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. And that's about her time working at a crematorium, which I would also highly recommend. It's a very interesting book. But this book is Caitlin going around to various places in the United States and in other countries and learning about local death practices. I found this book so interesting. I think about it all the time, and I talk to other people about it frequently because I find it very, very intriguing. Just the way that people handle death and dead bodies and the various cultural practices around it are just so fascinating to me. This book made me want to, it made me think about, you know, how do I want my body to be treated after I die? If you're curious, what sounds most appealing to me that I learned from this book is basically composting. They just put leaves over the body and they just keep an eye on it, put wire around it so the animals don't get to it, and they just let the body compost and just go back into the earth. And I found that concept very, I don't know, just comforting to me, like healing, like you just go back to the earth. But it's really interesting. It's really, really interesting to see how different cultures take care of their loved ones after they pass. So that's one that I would highly recommend. It's not like, I mean, I guess it's a little morbid because you're talking about death, but I don't find, it's not disrespectful in any way, it's not gory, it's not scary, it just talks about. Next book is All the Beauty in the World by Patrick Bringley. This is following Patrick Bringley as he spent time being a guard at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Met, in New York City. And it is part memoir, it is a memoir. It's talking about his time working there and interacting with the art, but then it's also exploring how he used that to work through the grief of losing his brother to cancer. And I found it very, very interesting. I love art and art history. That's something that I really enjoy. In fact, when I was in college, before I decided to just get my associate's degree, I was majoring in art history and humanities. So I always love learning about art history and learning about art and how people interact with art. And so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And then I really enjoyed hearing his story of how he used this opportunity to work through his grief. And I thought that it was very beautifully written, and it's an easy read. It's fairly short. So the next book is The Book of Eels by Patrick Svensson. This book was very interesting. It's about eels, but I would say it's more memoir than it is about eels. It's a lot about Patrick's time spent with his father. They spent a lot of time when he was younger fishing for eels, and then that's kind of where his interest in eels came from and why he decided to go into that kind of scientific field. It talks about how no humans on Earth have ever seen eels mate. No one knows how they reproduce. Like, we have theories, we have ideas, but no one knows for sure because no one has ever seen it, and they have not been able to breed eels in captivity. And that is just like the most wild concept. Like, in 2024, we have all these scientific advancements, and we really honestly don't know that much more than the people who really started trying to find the answer to this back in the 1800s. And so I just found that really interesting. And then he also talked about like the image of eels and how most people are like, they're really gross, and, you know, sometimes also associated with being like evil. And I thought that was very interesting. He talked about like the first Thanksgiving and how the pilgrims actually really survived on eels, and the natives showing them how to hunt for eels and use that to stay alive. And that was something that I learned. I did not know that. It makes sense. That was just interesting. Like the image of eels, the PR of eels, I guess, and then also the science of eels and how we just really don't know that much about them. He talked about how they're extremely endangered, which I also did not know. They're like on the brink of going extinct. But yeah, it was just very fascinating. And then it was also, I think, sweet to learn about his relationship with his father and how that grew and changed over the years. And overall, I really enjoy it. I found it a very interesting book. And then I have two honorable mentions that I just want to throw in here real quick. Our Moon by Rebecca Boyle. I didn't agree with everything she said in this book, which is why it's an honorable mention, but basically she's just talking about the moon, how it's affected us over the years, how ancient people used the moon to create calendars, and how they were so aware of, you know, planetary movements of the earth, of the moon, how we all interact. I thought that was very, very fascinating. I have always had this like deep desire to know about space and to know about the moon in particular, so I did really enjoy that aspect of this. But yeah, there were a few things in there that I was like, I don't think I really agree with that were more opinion than fact, but overall I thought this was a very interesting book, and it was interesting to learn about ancient cultures and how they relate to the moon. Again, that goes back to like my love for humanities, so that was my favorite part of this book. And then the last honorable mention that I have is In the Flow by Lisa Vitti. This is a book that is talking about the menstrual cycle and the phases of the menstrual cycle and how women can use the phases of the menstrual cycle to their advantage. I just think it's always important to learn more about our bodies. I enjoy learning more about the menstrual cycle. I think that it's something that should be talked about and should be learned about more. You know, there's kind of this weird taboo-ness about the menstrual cycle that I really don't think should exist, because it's very, I mean, obviously it's like the most natural thing, right? Because it's just like what women's bodies do. And so I think that's important. And I'm a big fan of learning more about women's health and supporting women in their health more often, mostly because I have been dismissed a lot as a woman with my various health issues, and thankfully I have a doctor who listens to me really well now, and I've been able to get some things figured out, but I just know some of the struggle of being dismissed, and so that's why I think something like these works are important. Again, I did not agree with everything that she said in this book. Some things I was like, okay, I really don't agree with that. That's an opinion, not a fact. So that's why, you know, to me, it got knocked down a little bit. Again, I don't think that I have to agree with everything in a book for it to be a good book, and this had wonderful information in it. If you are wanting to know more about, you know, natural family planning, about your menstrual cycle, about how to stay more in tune with your body, I think this is a great book to read, and there are some practices in it that I have applied and thought about to just be more aware of my body. So that's why I wanted to mention it, because I do think that it is and can be a helpful resource. So those were my favorite nonfictions of this year. Like I said, this is the most nonfiction I've ever read. I really got a lot more into nonfiction, and I think because in the past I've only thought of nonfiction as like self-help books, and I'm really not into that. I don't know, I think I find my self-help inspiration more from like religion than I do from just like, I don't know, Atomic Habits, which is actually a great book, but it's just not my brand of nonfiction. I would say that the nonfiction that I like the most are these kind of, you know, deep dives into kind of random topics that are mixed with memoir, and I found all of these very intriguing, and it makes me want to continue in my journey of reading more and more nonfiction. So let me know if you have any nonfiction recommendations that fit kind of this category, I guess, this type of nonfiction. I would love to dive into more nonfiction next year. So thank you for being here, and I will see you in my next video.